All right, so I'm just going to record it just because we might have some other people who end up wanting to use this. Let me make sure that's actually going. All right, it looks to be okay. So yeah, I'm gonna just reiterate a few of the things that Chesmere had mentioned, walk through the course outline, which I've put together, and a lot of this is going off of what he delivered to Kathy, Jose, and Deanna a year and a half ago. Um, so yeah, and I just kind of pieced it together in somewhat of a different way, added another topic or two that I find to be particularly useful for me. But that's going to be kind of the course will go 8 weeks or so, and I just want to make sure that like we have the benefit of it being a small class, so it's really I'll go at whatever speed you guys are comfortable. If it feels like I'm going too fast, we can slow down, or if it's getting boring and too easy, just let me know and we can try to skip ahead a little bit. But that said, want to make sure we cover everything. So yeah, I'll make it very interactive, very uh, go at your speed, and hopefully everyone will get a lot from it. So I'll begin by just kind of explaining the course outline that we're planning on doing. So the orange box showing where we are right now, I'll move this from week to week, but just want to go over the overview of the class, some of the pretty simple pieces of VBA without really getting too far into real macros. And this is like we won't actually touch the code yet, but just kind of show the outline of where to find macros, how to save them, how to use them, and how like you would go about building them without actually really touching the code. Uh, Week two, we'll begin looking at some of the cell and range manipulation, so adding data to cells and extracting data from cells, uh, and selecting ranges or a given cell within a given worksheet. Uh, so maybe I won't go through this entirely right now. I'll just point out that the week four and week five, this is where it's going to actually start getting pretty heavily more into the coding aspects of it. So week one, two, and three, kind of just getting our feet wet, understanding the the landscape of VBA, and then four and five and beyond there, that'll actually where it gets fun and where we can start really getting into the automation. So that's what I'm looking forward to. But I feel like we should start slow. That said, if it's too slow, we can always speed things along for you guys. So I just wanted to take a second before I get to like, further into the scope and overview of everything to hear a little bit about what you guys know about VBA and and understand like where you currently are. So do we want to do a little round table and just get some feedback from you guys? Maybe start with Marianne.
Yeah, I can start and say little to no knowledge, so I'm very open.
Okay.
So my problem is I'm afraid I might keep the rest of the team who've already been using this a little bit behind.
Okay, yeah, and I mean, don't worry about that. I think VBA, like you really can get out of it what you want. So if even if you want to have like some separate little sessions, I can meet with you on the side if you feel like you need some catch up, and we don't want to slow down the whole group, but we can come to
Exactly.
that as we go, and I really think it'll be easy for you to pick up. So I've confidence you'll be able to get up to where everyone else is pretty quick.
Thank you.
Annabelle?
Yeah, well, I've used a little bit of VBA. I mean, make some small changes, and I have recorded macros. So, but I'm no expert.
Okay, great. And Nan?
Man, actually, I had Jose and you help me to put the macro together and for my churn. So I start adding a lot of stuff and I mean, looks pretty good. But my question, sometimes I'm just kind of, there's some of like the descriptions, it's just too long. So I wonder if there's a way I can short that. And, because I have like a VLOOKUP macro, then I have a delete, that's fine. But the one is the description, my, move type, that one is just too long. It's getting too long because there's so many options, because if it's a director 1 to 2, then it's a promotion 1, that kind of things. I just wonder if there's a way I can short that, But again, I'm not expert. I'm just like a beginning. But I love it, basically. I just click and run, and it's take care pretty much 70% of my movement. So that's great. But I just have so many, if this, then that, like if then else, that kind of statement. It just, it's confused sometimes.
Right. Yeah, and I actually remember working on that with you a little bit. It did get to be a pretty complex formula, so maybe that could be a good candidate for something we can try to streamline a little bit and make more efficient and clean. So we can come back to that towards the end once we've mastered some of the more basic stuff.
Yeah, I was able to say, okay, if it's a new hire, it's a gain, the headcount is a gain, and then put the date as a report date. That is really cool. I add that piece. So I just need to get more into it.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, I think we'll get to the point where we can have those type of processes and formulas more automated. So we'll get to that eventually. And to that point, I'd like for everyone to, as we go and pick up more skills and add them to our tool set, think about different processes that you run already that would be good candidates to add a macro to automate. And Annabelle, not to put you on the spot, but I know Chesmere mentioned there's some work that you've been doing with benefits, global benefits, which could really be in use of a macro. So if we can get to a point where maybe some of that is like a good thing for us to automate, we can look into that within some of the last few weeks of the class 7 and 8, and actually walk through a real life example. So just think of things, and as they come up, we can actually go through them together as real examples.
All right. Well, I was assigned to those, but have not seen them yet. But we'll get there.
All right. Well, I guess we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but something to think about going forward. Okay, so that's kind of the outline. I can give a better description of each week as we go through that week, and also making sure to be doing refreshers of previous material we've gone through. But so the big stuff for the day, we'll look at the developer tab, VBA editor, even though we won't really be building any macros, and then recording macros, which a few of you have some understanding of already by the sounds of it. So then just a few more things before we get into it. So the first bullet is that we're going to really ease into it, and it sounds like people's skill levels and knowledge is at this point pretty basic. So we'll start with really some intro topics and ease into it, and then later on we'll really get into real life examples like I was just saying. So we'll really try to apply it. The third bullet, so this is actually a book that exists on the Skillport website. I have it as a hard copy, and I would suggest using it more as a reference than as actually a like actually using it to teach yourself, but more as you're going through. If you have a question, maybe trying to find it within that book. It's really thorough, but pretty big, and not something I would try to read with the intention of learning. And then this little note down here, Google is your best friend. I would have to say that pretty much everything I've learned from VBA, with the exception of a few trainings from Chesmere, is from just Googling how to do stuff. It's really powerful. Someone has pretty much done everything you're trying to do before, so you just have to know where to find it, what keywords to look for. But once you get the basics and understand if statements and the different types of loops you need to do, anything else you want to automate or build is pretty much out there if you just find the code, and even if it's just a line or something that helps you figure out a specific way to format or change a variable, it's all out there on Google. So I always have a browser open and I'm just Googling as I build different types of macros. Then down here, note to, and Chesmere mentioned this, but I'd recommend for you guys to follow along on your computer, and I can walk you through how we're doing each step and go slowly, so you guys can follow along. But I think it's going to be a much better learning experience if I'm not just doing it and you guys are watching me, but if it's actually interactive on your end. And then also, if you have a question, we can have you share out your monitor with me. I know Chesmere said he did that with some of the folks on his team when he ran the class last year. So that'll be a good way for you guys to ask questions as we go along. And yeah, just lastly, I'll be recording.
So Zach, you want us to open up our Excel?
Yeah, so as I'll hop into Excel in just a minute or two and walk you guys through the steps. So definitely follow along. Hopefully you have a second monitor or something that you can
No.
work. No? Oh, well, that makes it a little tough, but I think you can still
No, I don't, but that's okay.
follow along on Excel as I go. And yeah, also just make sure you ask questions at any time. Feel free to stop me. That's the nice thing of having a small class like this. It should be more of a discussion, I hope, than me lecturing you, and hopefully you guys don't get too bored with it. So I think that pretty much brings us to our beginning of Excel. Are there any questions at this point?
Nope.
Nope. All right. Great. Let me so I'll minimize this and open up Excel.
And Zach, you're going to share out the documentation after the training?
Yeah, so for this one, there's not going to be too much documentation involved. I was pretty
okay.
much just going to go from scratch from a blank Excel spreadsheet. And there's really not too much code either, but on a future session when we actually are building code, I can definitely share it out after, and so you guys can play with it and see if you have any questions and build off of that even.
Thank you.
All right, great. And so before I start, I would say probably the best way to think about VBA and learn it is when I'm doing something on my monitor, always be asking what if, like what if you also did this or what if you did that. That's a good way to make it kind of interactive and ask questions in your own head, and then feel free to ask them to the group as we come along. Things that could be additions or slight changes of the macro to make it better or just do a different function. So always be thinking about that as we go. Okay, so I've opened up a normal Excel workbook. Really, no bells, no whistles. It should look just like any of the workbooks on your computer at this point. The first thing to note, and I guess this is a question for you, on the Excel that you have open, do you see this developer tab up here on the top ribbon?
Yes.
Yes, I have it.
Okay, that's good. So we all have that. That's the first step. So now, I don't know if you guys have really used or explored this tab too much, but just walking through some of the tools that it offers to you. So you see the Visual Basic icon right here. So this is going to be your editor, and this lets you, if I click on this, it'll pop open another window, which unfortunately, so it showed that my personal macros, we'll get to that in a second, but I'll hide that. And so what we see here is VBA project book 1, so that corresponds to the name of the workbook we have open right now. So it should look the same for all you guys, just a blank white space. So this is the Visual Basic editor. I'll come back and walk you through this in just a second once we finish looking at the ribbon on the workbook. So that's the Visual Basic icon. If we click on macros, so that will allow us to run any macro that we have in any open workbook or our personal workbook. So have you guys seen the personal.xlsb file before, or are familiar with it?
Yes.
I saw that, but I usually delete it.
But I don't think I don't have any of these at all.
Okay, so I'll flip to this workbook, and in this workbook it's just the one we have currently open. But it's important to understand really what everything is down here. So this will be the list of macros you have, and currently in this workbook we don't have any available, so that's why this center pane is blank. But so the personal workbook is going to be, it's kind of a secret workbook that's open in the background anytime you have Excel open. So it's not actually a workbook that you can use, but it just houses any macros that you've loaded into it. And the purpose of this is, let's say I have a talent file open, and I want to run some type of like formatting of the header. Well, I don't have to actually load a new macro into that talent file. I can just run it directly from my personal macro workbook into that talent file. So that's a nice thing, that you don't have to add in a macro every time you want to use it. If it's a really frequent one that you are using regularly, you just can put it in your personal macro workbook and run it directly from there. That said, we're probably not going to use this much throughout our class, so don't really worry about this, but it's just kind of a heads up as to what's there.
Wait, is that means you can run this macro in any Excel file you open? Is that what I understand? What you're saying?
Yeah, that's correct. There will be a few things, like you'll want it to be referencing the active workbook rather than a workbook of a specific name. But yeah, to answer your question, that's pretty much right. Right, so that's a handy tool to know, and we'll maybe come back to that later in the class, but just useful if there's something that you run really frequently and want to have access to at the drop of a hat anytime you have Excel open. But so for the most part, we're going to be coding VBA macros into this workbook, and that will always be the active workbook you have open. So book 1, which we just all opened in Excel, that'll be this workbook, and that's where we'll put most of our macros, or all of them, for the purposes of this class. Okay, so canceling out of that and looking back into the developer ribbon up here. So the record macro, which I guess Annabelle, you've seen before. So this one is a really nice feature which lets you record anything you do within the Excel workbook. So the way you would record a macro is you click on that, it'll ask you to name the macro, where you want the location to be. So that's, again, personal new workbook, or this workbook, pretty much always going to be entering this workbook. And then if you hit OK, anything we do within Excel from here on is going to be recorded into the VBA code, and that'll help us if we're building a macro on the fly and want to know how to do something within Excel, like a formatting or delete, let's say, a certain range. That this can be a helpful way to do that on the fly. So anyways, I'm going to stop recording so we don't actually have anything. So this is macro 1 that I just recorded, and it's blank because I didn't do anything. I'll just go ahead and delete that so we don't have any confusion. But that's the record macro feature. So any questions up until this point?
And Zach, I'm assuming that with record you can edit, correct?
Yeah. So you can record it and then edit any piece of what you've recorded.
Okay.
Okay. So this top little corner is pretty much the grouping that is code. That's most of what is useful to me within the developer ribbon. There's a few other nice features which we may come to later in the class, but for the purposes of today, I think this top little quadrant is going to be what we try to focus on. So now that we've seen that, I guess we can really get into it and begin exploring the Visual Basic editor, the macro buttons, and then the record macro a bit deeper. So I guess this will be the time when it's useful for you guys to be following along on your screens. So is everyone good with an Excel workbook open?
Yep.
Yep.
All right, great. So
Zach,
Yep.
This is Marianne. So I need to keep my microphone muted because I have a fan on, and I've been told that sometimes the fan interrupts. So you may not hear from me from time to time just because I don't want to keep.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Just
But I can yell at Nan, and Nan can yell at you.
Okay, sounds good. Well, let me know if you have any questions or want me to slow down.
Oh, I definitely will. Thanks.
Okay, sure. So I guess we'll begin by we can create some sample data for ourselves to use. So let's just say let's make the most simple table you could have. We'll have a name and then an age, and that'll be our two fields that we'll have. We'll enter in some sample names. I don't know, name them alphabetically. Abe, Betty, Charlie, Dave. All right, so a few names. And then add in some ages. So let's say they're between 25 and 55. All right, so in the future, when we're trying to use more realistic data, I can prepare a sheet beforehand, but for this intro class, it's quite basic, so I think we'll just be fine with what we have here. So here we have a basic table. Let's say we want to record a macro that will format the headers of the table. So we can do record macro. Let's name it. We can give it a name. Format headers. I believe it'll yell at you if you put a space in the name. So the name of a macro has to be one word. We'll keep it in this workbook. There's the option to use a shortcut key for this. We won't do it here because it's not going to be a macro we run very regularly. But Nan, I think if you had a question earlier about like the usefulness of the personal macro workbook, this would really be it. Because you could have a macro you build right into the personal workbook, and if it's something you use really frequently, you could give it a shortcut key, so like Control-Shift-H, I don't know, that would run any macro for you in any workbook directly from the personal workbook, which can be a really handy skill if you have something that's frequent. So for the time being, we'll just record it into this workbook. Okay, so now you can see that the recording has changed from that red circle to start recording to this blue square, which will say stop recording. So anything we do from now through clicking the stop recording will record into the macro. So let's say, right, we were going to just format the header, so click on home. And so you might want to keep in mind that you don't want to be clicking to randomly when you're doing this, because any any cell that you select is going to be recorded as a cell selection within the macro. So just want to be careful of what you're doing. So we're in our home tab. Then let's say we want to select the headers, so cell A1 to B1. Feel free to click any color. Give it a green color, maybe white text, bold it, center it. So you guys can do whatever you want there, but let's just say that we went with that. So now if I go back to the developer tab and click stop recording, so now the macro should be recorded. And to go view this recorded macro, we can go into the Visual Basic editor, and now within, so you can see, now we'll do a little more of a discussion as to what's going on in the VB editor. So you have all of the workbooks that are open, which in this case is just book 1. There might be a few other items here, so these are actually not important for this project, but we have like add-ins that I've put into my Excel. You guys might not see this here, but we have like the employee ID add-in. So don't worry about that. The important thing is going to be whatever's within VBA project book 1 and then below here. So we have the modules, and I would say that building macros, you always want to be doing it within a module. The reason is that if you built it directly into this workbook, I believe it would work just the same, but it can get really messy, especially if you have a lot of macros, which, I mean, hopefully we'll all get up to a point where we are building workbooks that are pretty complex and heavily automated. So there might be a lot of macros here, so it's helpful to modulize them, and you can give them different headers. So I can rename module 1. I can name that maybe formatting. So if I change that, that'll change the module name up here, just to help keep them organized. Probably a best practice. So any questions here, like before we even go into what we see in the pane? Any questions about the modules or the workbook or where we're keeping the macros?
So far, I already learned. I mean, I learned from you is rename the module, because a lot of time I go back and say, okay, what is the module 13? What is the 11?
Yeah, so I'll try to give some like best practices, just important ways to keep it all clean. So the module name also has to be one word, but definitely handy to keep them named so you know where your macros are kept. So now that we get that, we can actually look at our first macro, which...
So Zach, this is Marianne. Because I don't have dual screens, I'm having a hard time following. So I'm going to follow you, and I'm not going to go back and forth and try to create this right now. So you're recording this, and I'll pick it up later so that I have the ability to do that. But it's hard for me to pop back and forth.
Okay, yeah, no, if that's what's easiest for you.
Yeah, let me just follow for now, and I'll try it.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I can send out this workbook to you so you can see, so you can use it after that if you have any questions.
Thanks.
Okay.
You know what I was doing is, Marianne, I minimized on screen. I just did a side by side in the one screen.
All right. Okay. Well, I mean, whatever's easiest for you, and again, slow me down if you have questions. So now that we kind of hopefully have a good understanding of where the macros are kept within the Visual Basic editor, and I'll always try to call this pane, or this window we're seeing right here, the Visual Basic editor, to make sure I'm not confusing it with the actual workbook, which is also still open. So you can know that there are two separate windows. You can close this one down. I can close out of the Visual Basic editor and then open it back up and won't lose anything. but we'll get back to how you go about saving your projects in just a minute or two. So now let's actually look at the macro we've just recorded. So it's called sub format headers, and then there's the open and close parentheses. So this is the format for any macro. It's going to be sub, which I'm actually not quite sure what that stands for, but that opens the macro. It tells Visual Basic that the following words are going to be the name of the macro, and again, these have to be one word, no spaces. So you have sub, the name of the macro, and then open and close parentheses. Any text after that is going to be the code of the macro, and then it's always going to end with end sub, which just tells it that the macro is completed. So once the code runs through and hits the line end sub, then the macro has finished running.
Yeah, that sub is from subroutine. That's just
Subroutine. Okay.
yeah.
Hey, thank you. I'm learning something too. Okay, great. And so one other thing you can notice is that you have some text that's black, some text that's blue, and then you have some green text. The green text is a comment, so this is actually not going to be a line within your code. It's just going to, like, as the Visual Basic editor runs through your code, it's going to skip over anything with a comment or with an apostrophe in front of it. So you can write some new comments just to help you know what's going on in the macro. It's probably another best practice as you have a lot of lines of code to comment stuff out. So you can say this is a macro, and if you put the apostrophe in front of it, it'll comment that out. So now let's actually get in and see what it's doing here. And I won't really get too far into the weeds of the code because I think we probably have another session or two before we can really comfortably be building macros as we go. But we'll just kind of walk through and see what this is doing. So if you recall what we did when we were building it, the first thing we did was we selected, and maybe I'll split screen this. The first thing we did was selected cells A1 and B1. So that's what's going on in this first line, range A1 to B1 dot select. So that will select that section of the workbook. And then after that, it's going to do some things which I actually would never even recommend memorizing how you go about formatting a different part of, like a different cell or part of the workbook. It's not really worth memorizing. I actually just use the record macro to kind of refresh myself on how to make those formatting changes. So you can see selection.interior. Well, this tells the cell, it says we're looking at the interior part of the cell rather than the border. And I believe what this section is doing, this with statement, is just telling you that we want to be formatting it with the color, and then it gives you some long string of numbers, which is just going to tell you that it's the light green that I selected. So this first part tells you to make the cell green. The second part, the second with statement, says now we're selecting the font, and we are making the font shade 0, which I presume is white. Then we're making everything go to bold. And then the last piece that we're doing is we're going to center the text within the cell. So, again, these aren't really steps that I would recommend knowing, but you can just understand that by recording a macro, we kind of cheated the system, and we didn't have to memorize all of this code. We just get it automatically created for us, and then we can use it again going forward. So any questions about this?
Nope.
All right, nope. So then let's say we actually wanted to use this macro. So what I can do is if I go back to my workbook, I guess I'll just use the formatting tool to overwrite any of the formatting we just did. So now it's back to how it was. And you guys can do this too to follow along. So now we have our empty table again. This could, let's imagine this is like a workday report that you just pulled and it has bad formatting and you want to clean it up. So you can get it in this format, go to developer, and now to actually run the macro, well, we could do two things, but let's run it from the macros location. So we'll click on macros, and if we make sure that we're looking into this workbook, which it should default to, does everyone see on their screen, well, except Marianne, for those who are following along, do you guys see your format headers macro? Nan and Annabelle?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, I muted.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so you guys have the macro there, and then let's hope that if we run it, it should redo the formatting that we just did. And
It did.
that looks good for me. Did that work for everyone?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, nice. So that's, I mean, at the most basic level, that's it. We just created a pretty simple macro, albeit, but something that works. And I mean, if you had like let's say 20 headers and you had 5 different worksheets, you could create something pretty simple that would format it in the same way for all the different worksheets, and it saves you the time of having to go through one by one. So if there's a report that you're generating regularly, it's really that simple to create something that lets you format and have control of it pretty easily.
Wait, so okay. Sorry, I was thinking something else. So you say if you have like 10 tabs, and
Mhm.
when you run, 10 different things and 10 tabs with the same header or whatever, and then so you just run this macro, then they will format every single tab.
So you would have to add in some new code to have it cycle through all 10 tabs.
Oh, okay.
But I'm like the point is that you can get the same formatting on all of them. It would take a few more lines of code, but really not too much to get to like scale it up 10 times or 50 times, and that's where you really get the time saving is when it's like even a simple step, something like this that you have to do repeatedly, but you can do it all at once really quick, and that's the whole thing about the automation.
So Zach, this is Marianne. Let me ask a stupid question. So I'm not fond of, everything we export out is Arial 10, and I always go to Calibri or something else.
Mhm.
So I can set a macro that says, okay, whenever I export, I want things to go to Calibri 8. And then I can just run that macro on my report and it'll take care of that.
Yeah,
Is that a
no,
simple one?
yeah, that would be really easy. Like if I were to do it on this, and I can record another macro to try that. So record. Let's say I want it to do. What do you say? Calibri. Yeah. So
Font
That's,
change.
yeah, Calibri font. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So we'll do that. So for this one, let's say we wanted to do it on everything.
Yeah, that's what I do. Yeah.
So everything, and then well,
Just do, yeah, you're already there, but
I
do
guess
8.
8. Okay.
Yeah, just do 8.
All right. So that'll do it, and then developer stop recording. So now if I go back, we can see that I have
Oh, there it is. Yeah.
this new
Okay.
sub. Um, so if I change this font to, well, actually, it's not going to change it to Calibri. It's only going to change the size of it, I believe.
Right, but I mean, if you changed it to something else, if you
Uh,
said it was Arial, then you ran the macro, it would change it back, right?
yeah, so actually, it does look to be. You can see this line right here.
Yeah.
It defaulted it. It changes it to Calibri. So now, let's say I have it in Arial and want to rerun that. So now yeah, it
Perfect.
does the same formatting. So anyways, like really simple things like that, you could even
Something as simple as that makes my life a lot easier.
have yeah, so you could even like have a keystroke shortcut. This would be a prime example of something I'd put in the personal macro so you don't have
Right.
to like load or open up a new workbook each time. It'll just be open in the background and you can do that on the fly.
Perfect.
Okay, so we have that, and then in a few weeks we'll learn. Let's say you do have like multiple worksheets, you can have it cycle through, so it makes the same change for every worksheet in the workbook. So that's pretty much the start of what I wanted to get through for the day. I'm trying to think if there's any other questions. Oh, okay. So now, oop, now I think the next question is, we have this workbook we've created now 2 macros in it. We want to save the workbook. So let's see how we do that. So you can save it in the normal way that you would for any other workbook. I will toss it in the VBA trainings. We'll call this week 1 demo. So the thing though is that since we have macros included in the workbook, the .xlsx won't work to keep those macros. So we have to save it as a .xlsm. So it says Excel macro enabled workbook, and we always want to make sure that it has the ending .xlsm. So I click that, it will now change within the file name, and if I save that, we now have that functionality, and the macros will be saved as well now that we have the file in that format. So you guys can go ahead and do that as well on your file, so you have the code we've built today saved within there. And by the way, I guess since we are going to do this class for the next 8 weeks or so, I would suggest just keeping a folder for it so you can keep the practice files that we're working on somewhere on your machine. So any questions about that or anything so far? All right, I'll take that as a positive.
Yep.
So let's
Yeah,
see.
it's good.
So let's try one more piece, and this I didn't learn right in the beginning, and wish I had learned it because I use it pretty much every time I build a macro now. So all right, let me put my formatting back to how it was so we can run that again. I'll make the text a little bigger too. So now we have our table. Let's say again, now let's say we're working on building the macro. So if we go within the sub format headers, one really handy trick is going to be the F8 key. So if I press F8, what it's going to do from here is it's going to step through the macro line by line. So you have to make sure your cursor is somewhere within the macro when you start. But if I hit F8, and you guys can do this as well, you can see that now it's highlighted in yellow. So that means that the macro is trying to carry out the highlighted line. So if I hit F8 again, it'll now jump to the next line within the code. You can note that it doesn't actually, it hasn't yet carried out this line yet. It's like about to. So it's only after we hit F8 again that it carries out the range A1 to B1 dot select line. So let's say I hit it again. Now you can see that it actually did that piece of the code in the workbook. And this is a really, really handy feature that a lot of programming languages don't have, and I wish they did because it would make it a lot easier. But now that we've ran that line, we can see that A1 and B1 are selected. Now I'm going to hit F8 again, and it'll step through each line of this with function, but I'm going to hit that a few times. So now you can see after I run the dot color equals that long integer, now the color is green, and I can keep going. So you can just kind of tab through this one by one. Now my text is white. So this is a really handy feature if you have a question about like what a given line should be doing, or what a given variable equals at a certain time. So very, very useful, but I can just click F8 again and again and again, and it will complete the running of the macro. So did everyone followed along there? I hope you like that, because that's just an awesome feature that I use every time I build a macro.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
The only frustration I get is, when I test my macro, if there's error, they just sit there, but they won't tell you what's the error. I mean, the compile error. So the FA will sit there, and then there's error, but you don't know what that is.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I follow you. Do you mean like the error?
See, like if I create a new line for example, and then they won't compile, so then there was a compile error, so they will highlight that line. You have error, but you don't know what error is.
Yeah. I mean, it should give you a little notification of what the error was, but sometimes it's pretty cryptic and tough to understand. So yeah, I know what you mean. But let's see if we can intentionally give ourselves an error. So if I just add in like another letter into one of these lines, now it shouldn't really know what this line means. So now if I run the macro, and again, so now we actually have a third way to run the macro. You can run it from the developer tab, click macros, and click format headers and run. So that's the first way. The second way is you can click F8, 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 and it'll step through it one by one. So then the third way is in the developer tab, you have these buttons up here, so you can run it from the green arrow, and then you can pause or stop the macro by clicking on these buttons as well. So let's say I'm in the Visual Basic Editor. I hopefully will get an error on this line, and then I click Run. So now it'll say object doesn't support this property or method. I don't really know what that means, but if I click Debug, it'll tell me the line where it was an issue, and it'll give me that the yellow highlight of that line. So now I can say, oh, I have an extra letter there. And then if I finish running it, it looks like it completed. So it'll run from that line. So again, just another way to run the macro if you're in the editor. Pretty useful that you can run the macro right from there rather than going into the workbook, clicking macros, and then running it from this location. So any questions there?
No.
All right. So I think that covers most of what I wanted to share today. Hopefully you guys have a decent understanding of where everything sits within the macro and Visual Basic Editor. You can see now that we renamed our workbook Week 1 Demo. It changed the name within the Visual Basic Editor. Now
and he's still recording.
There he is.
He's
We
back.
lost you.
Can you guys see me?
Yeah, but we lost you. We couldn't hear you.
We lost your screen too.
Let's see. How long was I out for?
It's just a few
10
seconds.
minutes?
15 minutes, maybe, I don't know.
All right. Well, anyway, so can you guys see the screen again?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I think I don't know exactly which piece you missed, but hopefully you have a decent understanding of where the macro sits, how you can run them. I was saying that now that I saved my workbook as Week 1 Demo, you can see that in the Visual Basic editor, it's now being recorded under the week1 demo.xlsm location. We have our formatting module here, and then within the module we have the two formatting macros that we've created, the headers one and the font one. So I think that is probably a pretty good place to cut it out for the day. Any last questions or even feedback? Do you guys want me to change something for next session?
This is good. No, it was very good, Zach. I'm sorry I miss them, but at least I'll have the recorded ones.
Yeah, so I'll put the recording out, I think on YouTube. I would like to, and then send you guys the link for it, like make it a private video. And then I'll also send out this workbook with the macro to all you guys. I mean, but hopefully everyone kind of has that except for Marianne, so it should only be useful.
Well, I actually did it, but I saved it in the personal instead of the others. So that was my only fault, was I didn't save it in the right spot.
Okay. So that'll be something you can look through this and make sure it's all saved. I'll have to
go back and redo it. I was trying to keep up, but it was flipping back and forth.
Yeah. So do you not have, you don't have a second monitor there?
No, just my laptop screen. So no, we're one screen monitors here.
Oh, okay. Too bad. Well, anyways, I hope it's not too hard to follow along, because that would make it easier. But as long as you can go back and watch the recording, that should also be good for the learning.
And I have Nan next to me.
Yeah, she's a good teacher too.
Yeah, she is.
No.
Yeah, I just need to change that back. So.
No.
All right, so I think that covers it. We'll get next week into, I'll go back to the course outline. Next week we'll get into different types of movement around a given workbook or worksheet. So actually getting in a little bit more to writing the code, but I know you guys got a little taste for that today with the recording feature. So anyways, hopefully you can have some time to practice or come up with other questions between now and then. I mean, if not, that's fine too, but we'll meet again next week. I'll put some time in the calendars, hopefully. So I want to make sure that we can accommodate this guy that Chesmere had mentioned in Prague. So for Marianne and Nan, I know you guys are on the West Coast. What's like the earliest that's okay for you guys to meet on a given day?
So if I can take it from home. So like 7:30 is when I'm awake. When I'm alert. I shouldn't say awake, is when I'm alert. So if we have enough heads, well, I'm not going to be here, but it should mostly be Nan, but it would be something she'd probably want to take from home.
Okay. I just work from home.
So Nan, is 8 not too early for you?
Well, no, I usually get here at 8. It depends on the traffic. But if you want to do 7, then I just work from home that day. It's only once a week, right?
Yeah, just once a week. I'm thinking Wednesday or Thursday of next week. That said, though, if you want me to make it later, I think the guy in Prague will accommodate our schedules rather than us accommodating him. So if we want to push it a few hours, like an hour later, that can be okay too.
Okay, and then if we can push like 8:30, if that's okay.
8:30, okay.
If it's okay, because I know next Thursday we have all hands meeting. I saw 7 o'clock. We got invitation 7 o'clock in the morning. Next Thursday.
That's Jake's meeting, Nan, because it's global.